Okay, welcome back. And today I'm going to be talking about the third biggest thing that I found that helped with long COVID. And I think it's probably worth saying as well, I'm sure I've said elsewhere, but that these three big things had to happen in the order that they did. So I don't think the yoga nidra would really have worked if my breathing had still been really, really, really awful. And I certainly know that my third thing, which is cold water, wouldn't have worked if I hadn't sorted my breathing first. Actually going into cold water when you're effectively hyperventilating is pretty dangerous. So I needed to be able to control my breath, certainly to some extent, before I started doing this. The third big thing that really helped me was cold water. And again, we say cold water swimming and people go swimming, oh, that's exercise. You don't actually need to be like swimming. You don't even need to be fully in the water. Again, it's going to be one of those things that people need to do in the way that works for them. I'm very lucky. I have Loch Ness just down the road. So, I have access to lots of big bodies of water quite close to my house. A lot of people don't have, a massive big lake just down the road. If you do, that's great. Some people have rivers, some people have all sorts of things around, and that's awesome. But if you don't, that doesn't mean that this won't work for you. So you can do things like splashing cold water on your face. And if you are thinking about going and getting into like Loch Ness or your version of it, it's probably worth trying to do some of the cold water on your face first, just to kind of like work up to it. So yes, cold water on your face. The cold showers thing as well, it didn't appeal to me at all. I would quite happily get into ice cold water in the wild, but turning my shower cold, I do still do it though. And I think the way to do it isn't to try and get into a cold shower, it's to have your shower and then turn the water cold at the end, just for, well, as long as you want, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, couple of minutes, whatever you can handle. But what I definitely learned was don't do it gradually, just straight down, like cold turkey, and then it just happens. All of those things, cold baths, if you struggle to stand in the shower, getting sort of, half into a cold bath, again, it's what you can do. With the cold water, for me, going down to Loch Ness, I'm an outdoor person. Being outdoors, exercise, all of these things has always been incredibly important to me, which I think is maybe why the cold water worked even more well for me than it might have done for other people. So I obviously got a huge amount of benefit from being outside in nature, being somewhere beautiful, being able to be out there in the wild and do something. It wasn't what I used to be able to do. It wasn't climbing mountains, it wasn't running, whatever, it wasn't cycling, but it was something in nature. So I think that was a big thing for me, sort of mental health wise. It felt like a bit of an adventure. So to start with, my first dip in Loch Ness, I inched myself in really, really slowly, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this. And eventually I managed to get all the way up to water up my neck, and I was in like less than a minute, and then I was out, and it was like, oh my goodness, what on earth did I just do? This was horrific. Clothes all back on again, and then I had energy. I felt, I don't even know how to describe it other than to say I felt like I'd been plugged into a socket. I just felt refreshed, energized, just, amazing. And it didn't last, it maybe lasted a few minutes, half an hour, I can't really remember. It didn't last very long, but I kept doing it. So I was going in 2 or 3 times a week. Not for long, I wasn't moving other than to get into the water, but I was in the water for a minute or two, and then I was in the water for a bit longer over time, and then I was swimming around a bit more, And, I just, built it up over time. And as I stayed in the water more, as I did it more, the effects lasted longer. So I would be able to do more as a result of having that extra energy. It would last longer. It would feel better, just sort of gradually over time. I started doing the cold water about a bit over a year before I was fully recovered. So it was the sort of the final third of my recovery, I suppose. If I'd started doing it earlier, would I have recovered quicker? I don't know. Like I said, I couldn't have started doing it too much earlier, right at the start anyway, because it would have been dangerous. But yeah, who knows? But I think, this obviously isn't medical advice, so speak to your doctor. But, I think it's worth trying, but just to be so careful. Remember with long COVID that less is more. You don't need to be in the water for very long to get the effects. Maybe 90 seconds to 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and you will get all the effects that you're going to get within that time. You don't need to stay in for longer than that. If you want to, if you're enjoying it, if you want to swim, then if your body's handling it, then sure, but you don't need to. And on some of my worst days, if I was able to get down to the water, I would literally get in, float around for a couple of minutes, and then get out, and it would help. On some of my better days, I was quite happy to stay in, float around, swim around a bit, it was great. But I didn't need to, that was because I wanted to. So yeah, and I think, other things to remember, especially when it's colder weather, be careful in the winter. You will be staying in less time, whether you're wearing a wetsuit or not. And, to remember that your body does carry on getting colder after you get out. So get out before you feel cold. That was definitely something, that I realised a couple of times, that it will take you energy to warm up afterwards. So again, it's coming back to less is more. You don't need to stay in very long. So start out with a short time. See how you react to it. If you're like, I'm grand, then, maybe you want to stay in a little bit longer, or maybe you don't. And that your body's reaction to it will change, because your symptoms, your nervous system, if you have a menstrual cycle, that will affect how you react to it. So in the second half of my cycle, I always feel the cold quicker. So I always stay in less time at that point. So all of these things have an impact. So, go ahead, try it out, but just go so easy, because what you don't want to do is to push it too hard and actually make things worse from something that actually can have really powerful effects. So yeah, there's all sorts of amazing stuff about it. I did a whole series of advent calendar about my sort of cold water journey through my recovery. And there's all sorts of other stuff about, more specific advice about doing it. I've done a couple of episodes on the podcast, which I can put the links to below. So yeah, I would love to hear from anybody else who's found benefits from it, because honestly, it has given me my life back.